that, we've reached Dan O'Shea. He worked as a coordinator of the hostage working group at the U.S. Embassy in Iraq and is a retired U.S. Navy SEAL commander. Dan, thank you for joining us.
Good morning.
Now, since our last conversation, 4 hostages have been released by Hamas. First, I want your reaction to that.
Well, again, Hamas has got their only card they have to play in this drama is the hostages, and that's what they're doing. They're trying to delay the inevitable, which will be an IDF offensive with tanks and infantry troops and in continued airstrikes to wipe out Hamas. But this is the factor, the joker card here is how they play out these hostages, because there's world pressure. I know there's pressure from the U.S. to slow the offensive or reduce the number of airstrikes, because obviously the fear is that, just like these hostages, Hamas puts their own civilians at risk when they launch missiles, and that's the concern, is that how much longer can Hamas hold off the inevitable, which will be an onslaught by the IDF.
As people are watching these images of the hostages being released, I'm wondering if you can tell us what is important to really pay attention to, because broadly speaking, of course, there is a certain message that is trying to be portrayed by Hamas, which has released these videos.
Well, again, they've released a video of one of the hostages that was wounded, I believe a young girl. She was being treated. She had bandages on her arm. So they're trying to convey this notion that they're treating these hostages well. Well, the reality is they violated every rule of armed conflict. You cannot take civilians hostage. It's violates rules of law in any place on the planet, and they're countering the narrative. This is just as much as the drama being played out in Gaza. There's a on the world stage, there's public opinion being formed, and Hamas is trying to release these hostages to curry world favor, that they're treating them well. But in reality, they just let a 79 and 85-year-old grandmother go without letting their husbands be released with them. So what kind of humanitarian gesture? Because they've kept that family, including those 2 women that are now going through, health screen and debriefs right now. They're still terrified because the love of their life is still being held hostage in Gaza.
You were talking about the strategy here when we're discussing the release of hostages. In a briefing yesterday, a spokesperson for the U.S. State Department was asked about hostage negotiations, and he said this, quote, "As far as I'm aware, Hamas is not getting anything in return for the release of these hostages." You touched on currying world favor. Aside from perhaps that, in some cases, what does Hamas gain from doing this?
Well, they're trying to get the high ground again. I mean, after October 7th, when they went in and literally massacred women and children, grandparents and grandchildren, they're trying to curry back world favor to come on their side and support them. The IDF, Israel has stated they're going to go in and wipe out Hamas. So the only card they have left to play are these hostages. If it serves their aim, they'll continue to let hostages go in 1s and 2s to drag this out. And they have 200 plus hostages. So this could go on for days, weeks, and even months as this drama unfolds.
What impact will it have on a ground incursion?
Well, this is the wild card. We don't necessarily know where those hostages. We probably don't have accurate intelligence 100% to where those hostages are located. So you have to assume that if Hamas puts their own people in harm's way, they put them in neighborhoods where they launch the missiles and rockets towards Israel, you have to imagine that they're holding these hostages in the same tunneling network where they're launching attacks against the IDF. So they won, and they've already made a statement. One of the Hamas spokesmen made a statement yesterday to a journalist stating that 22 hostages have already been killed by Israeli airstrikes. So they want to turn public opinion against Israel, and one of the ways they're doing that is these bargaining chips, which are the current hostages being held.
And of course, we've also been discussing the safety, the future, the potential release of the remaining hostages who remain in captivity. And I'm wondering how helpful, pivotal, critical is the information that comes from these hostages who have been released?
Well, they're obviously being debriefed. They're going to provide. Obviously, we heard that they were held with 25 others, so that gives a notion that they're being held in that type of, that we had 25 held. You could assume up until this kind of intel came out that there would be 220 different hostage holding locations. So it's critical to hear how others are being treated. But I'm telling you that the images that were released by Hamas, with them being treated and cared for and walked to the ambulance by these Hamas fighters, I guarantee the true story about how those hostages are being treated will come out in these debriefs, and it will be far from the rosy picture that was presented in the images released over the last couple of days.
Finally, Dan, I wanted to ask you, in terms of the world global pressure also that is existing, international players here, part of the negotiations one might expect, is it plausible for more hostages to be released, for potentially as many as are still surviving?
Of course, I think they're going to continue to release in small pockets. Again, these two older women probably, I'm assuming, at 79, 85 years old, they probably are on medication for, a number of things. Could be, high blood pressure, what have you. So it made no sense for them to hold on to hostages that may need medical attention. If they die in their arms, there's no value for them. So there may be more hostages released, but it won't be in large. I don't think it will be in large numbers. I think they're going to hold on to these hostages as long as they can, because again, as I keep stating, this is the only bargaining chip they have, and they're going to play this to try and prevent the onslaught, or at least the scale of the airstrikes and the IDF rolling in with tanks, because those commanders on the ground have to assume that every building that they are dropping a bomb on or going in through every neighborhood, they have to assume that the hostages are being held somewhere in that neighborhood, or maybe in the tunnel system below.